Ankur Sahu with Goldman Sachs. I head up the private equity investment effort across Asia Pacific, India too, in the energy sector, and so that's probably why they asked me to come here and speak and moderate the panel. What is the panel about? I think all of you probably know impact investing. Basically, it's investing with element of social and environmental impact in addition to financial returns. And in the developed worlds, there is a difference in terms of the return expectations and the actual realized returns. However, the question we're going to talk about today is in emerging markets where the need and the demand is so high, whether impact investing really is diminished returns or actually market returns. And I think we couldn't have asked for a better panel with industry leaders from different industries to be here. So welcome. And Kirsten, why don't we start with you, a little bit about yourselves, and then we can.
Thanks, Ankur. This is Kirsten Lund-Jürgensen. I work for Pfizer. Pfizer is a global pharmaceutical company. We are very much present in India with a significant manufacturing base. We have 5 facilities here. And I am head of global manufacturing for Pfizer.
Hi, good morning to everyone. Rajan Navani, the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of the Jetline Group. We are a third-generation family business that has been headquartered out of Thailand since the 1930s. We've had traditional manufacturing businesses in textiles and packaging with strong linkages to Indian business. We were co-promoters with the Aditya Birla Group back in Thailand in the early 70s. In the last decade, we've been, as a group, really looking at the entire digital and technology space and making significant investments, both across emerging markets, particularly India, as well as in the US and UK. And delighted to be here with all of you.
Good morning. Welcome. My name is Amit Mira. I lead Dell EMC across Asia Pacific and Japan. And as you know, everything is becoming digital, and technology is playing ever important role in everything we do. So our vision is, how do you create technology that drives human progress? And how do you make sure that the next generation digital future, so to speak, is really helping bring out the best from human and overall society? Give you the examples of what things we're working with several companies on, let's say, autonomous cars, or some companies on how do you use software to predict the failures in engine, be it jet engines and others, or creating a next generation infrastructure for digital cities or blockchain. So those are the sort of things we're working on. But at the same time, it will be remiss on my part just to not let you know that Dell has been quite active in India. We have 30,000 plus people. We are putting almost, we have put about $172 million so far in the charity as well as the impact investing here in India. So we've been quite active. One of the largest contributor to the public education system, public-private education system. So very happy to be here. We can talk more about it, but we come from the technology background. We come from the view that the human progress and technology has to keep pace with each other, hand in hand. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, all of you. And as you can see, we have people from different industries, so it'll be very interesting to hear different perspectives. Kirsten, Pfizer is obviously a leading global organization. Tell us a little bit about how you think about investing in general in emerging markets and the whole impact aspect of it.
So we are a healthcare company, and for us, our purpose is to impact health positively. And we do that by research, discovery, developing, and then manufacturing and supplying products. We do that around the world. We are in almost every market that you can think of. And definitely in India, we are very well represented. And we believe that we can do more than what we do here now. We already have invested 1.2 billion in capital, in facilities. We have more than 7,000 people in manufacturing, but then also in research. We have a lot of different global functions now here, and we have quite a powerhouse of ability to impact health from our business perspective. So that's the investing, as a business. But we also clearly believe in impacting health from a philanthropy perspective, and we are engaging in that for patients, to improve health systems, to also have our colleagues feel that they are contributing to the world in a broader way. And that philanthropy we do directly by donating products, cash, our services, our skills from our company, but also we do impact investment as a new kind of evolved way of engaging philanthropically.
Great, thanks. Amit, you're running the region for a leading technology organization, and obviously Asia generally is emerging. There are some developed countries like Japan, and now China arguably, but tell us a little bit about how you think about your presence in the region. Is it all about making money, or do you think sort of beyond that when you map out your strategy?
Yeah, so today, across the region, we have 45,000 plus people, so several manufacturing sites. If you look at our supplier network, we have more than 2 million employment here in the region alone. So we feel that we've been here for several decades, and it has served us well. We started investing in India at the time when it wasn't seen as the land of opportunity as it is seen today. And so you have to go early. If you look at from our perspective, you can't wait for things to just start peaking before you start investing. You have to start ahead of the curve. And so we always have a very sophisticated models to say, where is the demographics, where is the talent, and where is the market? And combination of the three is what gives us where should we invest and when should we invest. But generally speaking, if you look at it from a social perspective, 56% of the global poor is in Asia, Pacific, and Japan. Gender diversity issues outside of about 5 countries is extremely high across Asia, including some of the mature markets in Asia, at least from a gender diversity perspective. So clearly, this is a huge opportunity, both from a business perspective, as everything becomes digital, more education, more health, more digital health, to social aspect. So you have to create a business that can do well and also still make a difference. So you have to create that business. Your core ethos have to connect to that. So we look at our view, our investment/impact investing into 3 buckets. So first is on the extreme right, if you believe it's a legacy of doing good. That's basically saying we're going to take 2-3% of profit dollars and contribute to something we believe in. And that could be gender diversity, that could be youth education, that could be natural disaster recovery. That's kind of is a dollar given to an NGO to do something. On the other extreme left, if you see, how we live and how we act as a company. Because we have a tremendous responsibility on ourselves to make sure social and environmental part are integrated into what we do every day. Not just me as an individual, it's the entire organization has to act a certain way. So, for example, if you think about it, we recently announced ocean plastic. So we're going to take all our packaging and now make that driven from the plastic we capture from the ocean. Well, why? Because trillions of pieces of plastic is now floating around in ocean, and there is now technology to harness that in a cost-effective way And that technology has been worked. Now we're sharing with the entire industry, not only just in tech, but beyond. If that can become an industry issue, that is how we act and behave. So that's kind of is the other extreme. In the middle is think about impact investing. And the way we describe it is make a difference while doing well. So you have to have a financial return, but you are giving a social entrepreneur a money, a sponsorship, training, access to labs, and everything else to help that social enterprise takes off. So that's kind of is a three bucket it looks at. Again, we have been at this to the point where several folks from outside are coming and saying, hey, seems like you guys got this whole aspect of impact investing, philanthropy side, and the way you act and behave pretty well. Can you come share, or can I invest dollars with you? We have given now adopt a tree and or adopt a forest, because we want to make sure that sort of piece we can create a phenomena across the industry as well. But listen, this isn't about a company, this isn't about an individual. This has to be something bigger. The problems are bigger now. And that's why I'm here to talk about that. Hey, the more we can propagate these ideas, the more we can get folks to say, yeah, there are some bigger issues that we have to solve together, I think the more difference we can make.
That's very helpful, very interesting. Rajan, turning to you, I think being a family business and operating for many years, how do you look at this whole aspect? And does it differ from how a corporation might look at it?
Sure. No, thanks. It's pretty interesting because I was just hearing, both Kristen and Amit speak, and how the genesis of the thought process or the seed of any business. So I go back to when my grandfather, who of course was the founder of the business and started it, and I think the key entry point for an entrepreneur at that point was, what am I going to cater to the human needs at that time? And there was food, shelter, and clothing. I mean, and he started with clothing, and then ultimately we built condominiums, as well as did a lot around in the food space as well, and moved into packaging. And when I came in, I said, what's that human need that's really driving change significantly now? And I think when I look at my daughter, I think the connectivity that she has is probably far more important than the food she eats, or the clothes she wears, or the home she lives in. And so we decided about a decade ago to take a position to build a long-term sustainable business that leverages the mobile as the foundation around which we would build significant value. Interestingly, the philosophy of the business has always been, how do we drive better performance and lower price in everything that we do, and how do we create an ongoing process for doing that? And subsequently, whether it's been in business, whether it's been with business enterprises or consumers, that's one parameter that we have always continued to focus on, is that how do we drive better performance and continue to lower price, whether it's for our clients, for our customers, and the products that we build. And we realized, as I look back, the impact that we have had as a matter of driving performance, both from a product on many issues that concern environment and social, have also been an outcome of that entire process. I mean, just going back, so in packaging, I still remember in the late 70s when, wood in packaging was really the key. We moved, we created breakthrough innovation in paper, and actually were able to package an entire scooter and send it to Indonesia, another emerging market, where there were no guidelines on, wood, etc., and, things like that, but just driving because it gave us better performance. And we knew that 5 years later, the price performance metrics would continue to kind of develop. Little did we realize that there was a huge environmental, effect and impact of what we were doing then that is so obvious today. Taking that same position, the fact that, the mobile phone provides such a high degree of empowerment, particularly to countries like India, to the person who uses that. And we've seen that growth, in the last several years. We realize that while we have tens of millions of consumers around our products and services that are more catered towards, entertainment and, engaging and last mile connectivity with the consumer, we are able to now power a lot of services, a lot of, products that are impacting them on a daily basis. We're doing a very interesting product which we are now offering to farmers that enables them to take smarter decisions, to plan their agriculture, and actually resulting in very high incremental growth in their revenues, in their incomes. When we look at some of the products that we created here, we've taken a product to the UK that is now actually, creating a very strong match between job seekers and those who are seeking employment, and actually bringing down, the cost of actually matching people to a job from about 300 pounds in, 30 days to about 5 pounds in 30 minutes. So we are seeing that how driving price and performance as an outcome of a lot of our products and services are now enabling people to get better jobs, make them more, skilled to be able to do better. And I think the entire basis around leveraging technology to be able to create a larger good, what you talked of, I think is immense. And I don't think we have even begun that process. And so to me, while I look at our business, definitely we are now measuring performance within a sandbox. And that sandbox actually takes into consideration certain constraints like environment, scale, social equity, which I believe are exactly the parameters that go towards impact investing. And also as a foundation, like what Amit mentioned, we do have certain parts that we give away to philanthropy. But the way we look at philanthropy is we look at philanthropy now giving a capex investment and actually creating the operational efficiencies around it as a real business. So I think you're giving some sort of an advantage, but then kind of monitoring it through a professional method to be able to drive profits. And I think that's a discussion we'll definitely engage over the course of the day. But yeah, it's very interesting. I think we are in great times. It's very hard today, I believe, to create any kind of business and sustain it over a long term without it having an impact on the larger population, particularly the kind of businesses all of us come from.
It's fascinating to hear your ideas, and it reminds me what a culture of creativity you have here in India, and I hear it like from the big company perspective, but also from an entrepreneurial perspective, and how much you have to continuously bring new ideas to really survive in the long term, but how much potential each idea has, and scale it up. And it's fascinating to listen to you. I'm really very impressed by how you approach things.
Yeah, I think it's actually good for business as well, because if you think about it, 50% of millennials actually won't join a company unless their purpose and ethos matches up with what they believe in. If you just did a survey, 50% of millennials believe that company exists for social good. They actually don't believe companies exist for just the shareholders. So from that perspective, we have found a very strong level of engagement, not just through millennials, across all demographics, by having engagement with community and by having more giving programs. 60% of our people in Asia are engaged with community in terms of giving their time or giving their money, as among the highest.
That's a very, very good point. And I think, speaking a little bit about, the firm I work for, I think the point Amit made is critical, which is it's not a add-on thing or a nice thing to do, but it's critical to attract the best talent, and especially companies that are completely dependent on talent and people. I think it becomes a critical thing. In terms of sort of the approach that we've taken, it's around the aspect of clean energy and empowering women, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So in 2012, as a firm, we committed to deploy $40 billion in the next 10 years into clean energy. And then we blew past that hurdle in 2014 already. So now we moved that up to $150 billion till 2025. And part of that is making sure that we ourselves are focused on using or improving our environmental footprint. So again, I think the key message here is that it's not a nice thing to have or charity, but really for organizations of future, you have to do this in order to continue to attract the best people. The other aspect is there's a well-known program called 10,000 Women, where we basically enable and mentor and provide business education to women. In India, it's in partnership with ISB, and help people become greater leaders and business managers, women that is, and then expanded that to 10,000 entrepreneurs, which is about getting better access to capital for women entrepreneurs, because there is a big gap, whether it's on the credit side or the equity side. So again, these are initiatives to make sure that we're harnessing the full power of the full population, and then also making sure that we continue to attract the best and retain. So again, the point here it comes back to is that it's not a fashion, but it's actually critical for organizations. Interestingly now, sort of a little bit on, generally we all agree that it's good, but do you think differently about this aspect in different countries, developed versus emerging, different continents? I mean, a little bit of perspective on that, and start with you, Kirsten. When you think about it, is it a global, holistic view, or you tailor it specifically to where you're operating?
So as we are operating globally, we see the needs truly globally, and we don't differentiate between emerging and developed market as such, because even in developed markets, you have population that is vulnerable, that has needs, that needs to be supported from a philanthropic perspective. So clearly for us, we look at the needs wherever they are, wherever we do business, and we look at the key factors there of need, and also then capability to really have an impact with the philanthropic effort. Is it really possible to drive change? So for us, no difference based on need and opportunity. And we have all sorts of different ways of addressing those needs. Ideally, you want to address a need and it becomes a sustainable solution, that it really gets something going as a catalyst, and then it just keeps developing. And that's really in the spirit of this summit of entrepreneurialism, that each idea to solve a major problem needs to be nurtured and supported. And ideally, our philanthropic efforts would go to support those ideas and support the individuals that are inspired to really have an impact on the world. And so, for example, we have here an exhibit on the collaboration we have with the India Institute of Technology in Delhi, where we together, Pfizer and the Institute, have some incubator funding. And so there is, individual coming up with a great project that will impact the health of potentially hundreds of millions of people out of a small idea. And all we do is get it going. But then that entrepreneur is unencumbered to make the business work.
But on that point, just to sort of, that's very interesting, and I think what's really critical for development. But when you look at funding those types of initiatives, do you measure like, hey, this could be very helpful? How do you look at the financial return and risk aspect of that when you're evaluating it?
So for us, it is about impact, and we personally, as Pfizer, or specifically Pfizer, we are not looking at the financial return as the major return. We like to have impact on health. We like to have the social benefit, and we look at this idea being commercially viable for the person who has it, but not for us, because we are funding the startup, but we are not benefiting from that person's idea. So it's kind of unencumbered. So we look at it and say, can this be successful with our business expertise? We help that idea to be patented so it can actually survive the growth phase. and then we step back. So we value it in a way financially, but not for us.
Got it. And Amit, you mentioned in India, it's mandated at sort of 2% plus minus of
yeah.
revenues. I mean, when you think of the budget and the overall scale of the dollars or rupees or renminbis, how does that sort of decision-making come into play? Is it whatever the need, you'll fund it as long as it meets the goals, or is there a budget?
Yeah, see, you have to start with certain beliefs, what you believe in. We do believe in gender equality. We do believe in, youth education gap is the biggest way we can fix a lot of things in the long run, because digital divide, I mean, if you just look at it, wealth creation for a youth is very dependent on how digitally savvy they are from early days on. So yesterday, we got demonstration from one of the NGOs that we're part of, and it's visually impaired folks, young children, who have created electronics, which basically gives them a signal. If a car is honking, it will give them a tactile feedback on their wrist. My point is, it's a simple circuitry, but just imagine that a visually challenged, visually impaired person walking, and there's a car honking behind, which you may have seen outside, is a very common phenomena here, and they have no idea. And they got all this inspiration from somebody being hit by a car. So point is, these things, to me, idea is not just that product. That individual's life now is changed. If that person can create that product today at 12-year-old, and imagine what that person will be able to do as the person hits the working age. So point being is, we believe that the ethos of gender equality, ethos of digital divide to be removed, and of course environmental part, as I mentioned, plastic and others, are a huge objectives for us. So you start with the objective. Then you say, do I want to give $1? So, the challenge has always been that giving $1 makes things slow. There's no accountability sometimes. It just works. System is, you need to give the dollars where tipping point hasn't reached. You have to give $1 so a certain level of help can be on the way as quickly as possible. But then we like the model where there's a little bit more accountability to make a difference, to make an impact. And that's what, let's call it impact investing. And finally, we believe that that's just not enough. These two, there would be never enough dollars unless more people are together, unless everything we do is together. So from an India perspective, dollars are automatic. India gets actually more than its fair share. It's not dependent on how our business is doing. For us, for 30,000 team members to feel engaged and proud of working for a company is the side benefit as we make a difference.
Yep.
I saw almost somebody cry yesterday looking at the presentation. I had to hold myself back, very inspired looking at these young children who are doing so amazing things, So, and that sort of thing flows through the organization. Then you say, I want to work for this company. And that to me is, you can't put posters on the wall and say, you should work for this company. People have to feel, and people have to act in that way, that this company is making a difference, and I want to be part of this movement.
Great. Yeah, I mean, in India, they'll be buzzing all the time if they're wearing that device.
Yeah,
so.
but at least they will be safe. They won't be on the road.
Rajan, switching to you, like, how do family businesses think about I know everybody wants to do it, and it's beneficial, as you said. It's not just nice to do, but it helps in terms of the connectivity and all the benefits you talked about. How do you think of the scale of investment? Is it part of, like you said, is it CapEx and then you just sort of support that, or is there a systematic way of allocating every year some amount to this effort?
So yeah, I think we have a very structured approach to this entire space of creating impact, investing, philanthropy. And again, interestingly, it has evolved and changed very significantly over the years, right? So earlier, wherever we set up our manufacturing businesses, the idea was that the community around that is really the one that you need to build, you need to nurture, because your employees came from that region. And typically, manufacturing plants, both in Thailand and India, were a little in the outskirts, more in the developing areas of the country. And, you know, it was how you build a township, how you build, you know, housing and ensured that there was education for the employees, their children to go. And, you know, we looked at philanthropy and investing in that kind of an activity at that time with no financial return, so to say, but having an impact on, hey, this is a great company to work with because of all the things that Amit said. And when I look at it today, you know, how we have really evolved, I think now there is a greater view, at least the way we look at it, around the efficiency of, you know, every dollar that we give. Or we look at that impact that it's creating a far, far deeper and far more closer because we know that, you know, it will continue to refuel, you know, and do a lot more and achieve a lot more. So moving away from a traditional mechanism of, you know, a foundation where 15-20% of the cost gets allocated, you know, towards administrative, and you're always trying to find impact. You know, we have a two-pronged strategy now where we look at it from an investment perspective, where we drive financial outcomes, we drive financial returns with deep efficiencies, and as long as the efficiencies are meeting the criterion, you know, the exact absolute number of the outcome is not really a criterion. So in Thailand and Southeast Asia, numbers like a 5% IRR are acceptable, right? I mean, at the lower end of the spectrum. On the other side, which I was talking about, the CapEx investment, right? So that's, again, given as pure philanthropy, but like what Kirsten said, towards areas where you know there is, you know, great things happening, whether it's in education. And earlier, we used to look at it as, you know, a physical kind of a, you know, CapEx investment. Today, we're doing a lot around digital, you know, and then actually spending some of the surplus amount, you know, that is there towards digital literacy. So one of the themes that we have is livelihood generation and a constant method of upgradation of livelihood, so mobility of skills and, you know, things like that. And that's something that we as a business, as a group, are very passionate about. And even personally, you know, I've been part of the India at 75 agenda. You know, the Honorable Prime Minister Modi talks about a new India of 2022. And, you know, I've been personally involved in a lot of those activities. And I must say that the current government has really taken it to a completely different level, viewing urbanization, viewing education, viewing, you know, how do you build human capital very differently, is encouraging models and businesses that are actually able to drive efficiencies for the dollar, as well as, you know, create some sort of sustainable livelihood around the entrepreneurs that build.
That's a great segue to you know, switching gears a little bit. I think we've established that it's great for businesses to do this, and it's not just a nice to have, but it's actually really critical for just even from a business perspective as well as the impact you're making in the societies you're living in. Now switching gears, you addressed the government part. I'll be curious to hear your views on, let's pick sort of 3 countries, US, China, India, and comparing sort of the initiatives and regulations, whether it's tax or transferability of money or ease of setting up stuff or even donating money to these types of efforts. Just curious to hear where you think some countries are doing it better versus others, and any other comments you may have. And start with you, Kirsten, in terms of comparing and contrasting. Do you see any differences when you're operating in these different regulatory regimes?
I think you have to understand the different environments well. You have to reach out to the right partners. I mean, just in general, to do impact investment well, you can't do it alone. You are better off reaching out to partners that can do certain pieces better than you as a company, right? So it's always a collaborative effort. And the way these collaborations work is different in each country. That's clear. Generally, it's very important that the local governments in that country are supportive. Clearly, here in India, it's very, very visible that innovation, entrepreneurialism, the whole summit topic is very fitting to what's happening in India, and that you want to make things easier, you want to get things going, you don't want to have barriers to growing ideas fast to be implemented. So we feel the time and the environment here in India is fantastic for really getting things going, right? So the change in other countries is going on their own pace. And I wouldn't even know where to begin to compare it. The countries are very different.
Yeah.
China, India, US, it's just culturally different. It's how things work are different. And so my message is the world has different places and they all work in different ways. And as a global company, you need to understand it and support that local culture so that something great can happen. And so I
Makes
don't
sense.
really have
No, makes sense.
a simple answer to that, but I can say that here there is a culture to think, culture to inquire, there's creativity, and there's also passion for
Agreed,
change,
agreed.
and that's wonderful.
Understood. Amit, not to put you on the spot, China, I mean, it's gone through a tremendous period of growth, and we can debate about, what the pros and cons are, and I think that's not the topic of the day, but are there things you see done there that are easier in terms of regulations or ease of doing business that you think others countries can learn from?
Yeah, and this can be a long topic, but let me try to make it shorter by saying we recently published a Women Entrepreneur City Index. Where are the women entrepreneurs thriving? And with a bent towards digital entrepreneurship. And we published, these are the top 50 cities and globally, and there were 2 out of India, and there were 3 out of China, a couple of them in Australia, 1 in Seoul. So you can see that about 8 or so cities across Asia Pacific and Japan. But clearly, US leads the way in terms of if you're a woman entrepreneur and if you want to be in digital entrepreneurship space, US still provides that the maximum amount of cities where you have the ecosystem, you have the network, and you can grow and thrive. It doesn't mean it's not improving here. I mean, Bangalore is one of the best cities to do in India. But we can always look at the glass half empty versus glass half full. And from our perspective, things are improving rapidly. Across the world, women's versus men's mix of startups have changed 30% in the last 2 years. It's improving rapidly. And I think current environment is such that I think, you heard several companies from US ISPF that I'm part of the board are announcing women entrepreneurship specific initiatives as well. Our global leader, Karen Quinto's chief customer officer, was here on the stage talking about how much we are supporting women entrepreneurship, including giving them the entire ecosystem. We have a program called DWEN, Dell Women's Entrepreneurs Network, that meets every year in multiple cities, and including the girls. So last year, my daughter also joined that program. She's 13-year-old.
Great.
So she was able to see what an entrepreneurship is like, what digital, skills are like. And it has changed her thinking in many ways, and I hope positively, and only time will tell. But that's the kind of sort of things we have to think about. Improvements are being made. Still, India is definitely on a fantastic trajectory, but more work needs to be done, and companies have to do more to make it happen.
And Rajan, personally, I also feel we're in a golden period in India where, the next 10 years probably present the biggest growth opportunity globally, relatively speaking. And you were involved sort of on the initiative you mentioned, and I think the government's taking a lot of steps. But as a business sort of owner also, what's the gap between kind of the policy intent versus ground sort of reality?
So, interestingly, I think, the growth for India, I think over the next 5 to 10 years, if we're talking of, our economy, doubling from a 2 point some trillion dollar to a $5 trillion economy, and probably going up to 10 trillion, as is being talked about. I think it's very clear that India's growth, both in terms of jobs, in terms of percentage to GDP, are going to come from new age businesses, businesses that are not necessarily all the traditional businesses that have typically led to growth in a lot of the Western countries in all of these years. And therefore, as a business owner, we are really looking at how do we create leadership within our companies to be able to identify those opportunities, really step up the gas on some of those areas where we believe that India particularly can become part of larger global supply chains, for example. Which are those areas? Which are the areas, particularly around digital and energy, like you mentioned, where India can go and take a leadership? So I think when we look at that kind of a thinking and a visioning, which is also being done by the current government, I think it is about what Amit started with, a longer term strategy for India. And I know that longer term is always still a few years ahead, but given that we are a 1.3 billion people country, never in the history of mankind has a country of this size and scale, a democracy, moved from being a developed or an emerging country to a developed nation. I mean, in a democratic process where you're taking large numbers of people along, this has never happened. And I think when you look at that in the context of the multiple opportunities and what the current government is doing, there's tremendous hope, particularly for entrepreneurs and businesses like us. And we are looking at India as becoming a very strong base, not only for leveraging the Indian talent and the Indian consumer who we are going to cater to, but actually taking on a lot of our learnings and addressing global markets, which we have already started to do, both as a business and even in the process, creating impact, like I was mentioning earlier, driving price performance kind of products into developed markets is changing the paradigm.
That's actually interesting. So, I guess in the interest of time, I'd like to sort of have each one of you comment on this particular statement. A very famous investor sort of said that today for an entrepreneur, focusing on areas that are deemed to have greater social impact is actually a huge competitive advantage for two reasons. One is what you were saying, which is there's big numbers, there's need in emerging markets in particular, whether it's healthcare, energy, education, technology. So naturally, business demand is the biggest sort of driver of profits. So in that sense. And then secondly is that corporations and big companies that are sort of potentially their competitors are slower to move. We know we're all moving, but they're slower to move. So it really is a competitive advantage and something people should look at starting more businesses in. Just comments from each one of you on that particular statement, whether you agree or think differently.
One thing that comes to mind for me is back to what everyone has touched on, is the environment. So you would say we are into making medicines. What has that to do with the environment? So is it optional to think about it? No, it's not. So we clearly have always in mind that making pharmaceuticals in the most sustainable way is very critical for the future. And it's that global health, save the planet, all of that is very important, not only to our colleagues, but really to global health overall. And we have very high expectation of our facilities around the world on metrics on carbon footprint, waste, water. We measure all that, we publish it in our annual report as we publish our financials. Every colleague is focused on it. Everything we do, we look at it from a broader environmental perspective. You can say you don't need to do this. I believe we need to do this because our patients want a good medicine, but they also want to know that these medicines are made in the most sustainable way and in a responsible way. So I think that's an example where we go beyond the base business, but it is good broadly, but it is also good for business in the long run because our reputation, our credibility, people trusting us will make a difference long term.
Very good point. Very good point.
Talking of the statements, I think the Friedman statement of the business of business is business, right? Several decades ago, I think actually took business to, look at business as, financial outcomes and deliverables and philanthropy as two alienated kind of, discussions. But today, the way I see it, as I said, we cater to tens of millions of millennials, and we are engaging them on the smartphone from 30 minutes to 50 minutes every day through, our products, which are on gaming and digital. And we are looking at the kind of engagement and capturing data that clearly indicates to us the sensitivities towards both needs as well as their, the worldview around, like what Kirsten was saying, being socially and environmentally responsible. And I think, if I'm not able to cater to my consumer in that manner, I'm not doing justice to my business in any case. So I think, for me, it's a pretty much a non-debatable subject today, that my business also demands me to be, impactful in what we do, create a social aura, because my consumers as well as employees, also we hire some of the youngest talent, and they want to be associated with companies that give them pride around these things.
So Amit, would you agree that entrepreneurs should look at these areas and sectors more because there's an opportunity?
Well, I think let me just summarize, just make a quick comment on this aspect. I'll say very quick succession. It's better for business because customer, partners, employees are looking for a company that is socially responsible. We talked about it, there's plenty. Two, it's better return to invest in emerging markets. I mean, if you just look at the last 20 years of return, emerging market return has been 2x. There's more opportunity, scarcity of capital. As long as you can navigate that market, you make a better return. That's just a simple math that just data proves it. Third piece I would say is sustainability of business. That tends to apply a lot more to the larger company. But let me say sustainability of the companies depends on 4 factors. Do you have a purpose? Do you have a performance? Financial success is important. Without that, you can't perform, you can't sustain yourself. And then, do you have a passion? Are you continuing on with what you wanted to accomplish? And then finally, I would say diversity. If you can't make your organization diverse in your thoughts, in your actions, in your culture, sustainability will be challenged. We don't build companies for a year, quarter, a decade. We want to build a company for multiple decades to come, multi-generational. And that's why the social aspect is a table stake. It's not even something that you have to do as an afterthought. This is a table stake for sustainability of the company. Now, coming back to your question about entrepreneurship, I would say entrepreneurs have this challenge of, do I take on social agenda too soon? Or is it something I will do when I get to a certain tipping point? I think this is where founders' personality and the self will make a big difference. Some entrepreneurs will say, no, this is who I am, the company impersonates me, and this is what I believe in, and the company will believe and align with that. Some will say, money is my first important piece. When I get to a certain tipping point, I'll put something aside to make sure that I'm harmonious with the community. I think the former approach is better, when you actually integrate from day one. And that's how sustainable and successful companies can be built from day one.
Perfect.
That said, don't do it at the cost of not being even survival. That to me is not the right trade-off. You have to survive and you have to sustain.
No, great summary. Couldn't have done it better. I think in the interest of time and leaving some for Q&A, let me just sort of make a few statements, which is one, you heard from all of us that this is impact investing in emerging markets is clearly not a compromise on returns. It's actually quite the reverse. You could actually make better returns, not just financially, but from all the other elements, which is to be a better place for people to work and continue working, and other sort of environmental and health and social benefits. The second point is, again, the corollary of that is that for entrepreneurs, it's actually a good way to seek these sectors because of the opportunity and the fact that investors and corporations are now more looking to support these initiatives. So that's the second point. And thirdly, I think, this is a phenomena that's not a short-term phenomena. So, it'll be not just a 5-year, 10-year thing, the sustainability point. This, particularly in emerging markets in this part of the world where we are in, is going to be something that's going to create a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunities for foreseeable future, decades, if not more. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions, but it's been a great discussion.
Yeah,
Yes,
question
please.
there.
Hi, good morning. My name is Yen. I'm from a company called Shopmatic. We are an e-commerce enablement platform, and we play here in India. We are specifically targeting to emerging markets, especially in the e-commerce space. But even within the emerging space, we do look at rural tier 2, tier 3 markets to see how we can digitize those economies as well. So I guess really my question today is not really a question, it's more perhaps a ask for help. We've been through this event looking at how digital, the world of digital can really help these economies, help women entrepreneurs within these economies. But one thing we find really lacking is that there is not a lot of talk about how we can actually do cross-border standardized ways of connecting commerce across countries, across regions, across cities, across this part of the world. So because we are in the e-commerce space, I'll give you an example. Payments, for example. If you want to get a payments account, you've got to go through a KYC. And that KYC is difficult, very difficult for somebody who is going to not be in a tier 1 sort of city. So I think that if there is some way of large organizations like yourself who might be able to work with governments to standardize that, I think that we might be able to move this digital economy a lot faster and be able to move into those rural areas a lot quicker. So that's sort of my plea for help, and my question, I guess, is just, is there anything that is helping, any conversations with governments right now to try to standardize that across markets?
Well, I think, the few comments I'll make is, one is that there's two parts of the question. One is, can we make it more standardized? And, there's a lot of efforts being made, the UID and the Aadhaar card. So the KYC now actually, with a cell phone, if you go try to get a cell phone, you can get it in 2 minutes. So there are tremendous progress being
GST
made
is the
there.
biggest initiative of making
exactly,
sure the whole
exactly.
country becomes one.
The other part, which is, I was at the CEO roundtable in Hong Kong, which is a more delicate issue, which is a lot of global companies want to access Indian consumers, and they want to do it like from outside and come in and sell products. I think that's more of a, difficult question for the government, and, you also want to give local entrepreneurs, local companies a chance to develop and grow and not just make it a level playing field. So we could be talking for days or months on that part, but I think there is clearly progress being made on the standardization part of it.
I think if we can win through GST and make it one market, I'm telling you, anyone making investment in country will have much better return, because now you can access the entire country as one market versus 29, 30 different markets. I mean, you should have seen, 10 years ago when we were shipping just one box from our factory to faraway place, the amount of paperwork was this. Every state needed a paper. Every state needed a signature. And by the way, somehow, if one of the paper was lost, we could never collect our money. No, I mean, just think about it. That was the nature of doing business. To be in a spot where GST is here, as an investor and as someone who has been actively engaged in the country, I mean, this is just day and night. So I'm just saying, let's just make this happen before we worry about that the cross-border needs to be, more evolved countries including China, hasn't made the cross-border standard yet.
Agreed.
So-
That's why I said it's a issue that can be debated for long.
But it's, you know,
Other-
it's on top of every government's agenda, and particularly in India, definitely. And you know, like what you said, Aadhaar, UID, the whole demonetization effort has actually increased digital spends. There's data to back it significantly, and now, even while that has, you know, kind of come down, it's still about 120% higher than what it was. So the growth rates in that are going to be very significant, you know.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Hi,
Sorry,
good morning. This is Avik Pala. I'm from CliniOps. My question is a niche one for Kirsten at Pfizer. There are different kinds of disease profiles, right? So for certain, you run clinical trials just in US. Most of them are probably very global. But there are certain diseases which are very focused to emerging markets. You know, it doesn't happen much beyond Africa and other areas. So how much of your kind of trials are global or Africa-oriented than just US consumer-focused?
I have not understood the end of the question. Sorry, you were talking about global, different country, different diseases, but I didn't get acoustically the end of the question.
Yeah, no, so clinical trials, right, when you run them, global trials, that's one. Some are very, let's say oncology focused, they're very US focused. But there are certain like infectious disease, vaccines and other things which are very Africa focused or, emerging world focused. So what percentage of our, how much of your trials are targeted to those kind of disease profiles?
Yeah.
So your question is, where do we run clinical trials?
No, it's more like what percentage of your sort of overall R&D clinical trials are focused on, global diseases or US-centric versus stuff that may be more specific
so what
to
our research is
Yeah.
focused
Yeah,
on?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
more
Infectious-
emerging markets.
Okay.
Infectious disease versus
Yeah.
degenerative.
Okay, okay. So let me just start at a high level. So we, as a global company, we have an overall research effort, and we can't focus on all areas, but we have certain target areas. So we have oncology, which is a big focus because there is so much unmet need. Then we have vaccines as a very big area because we believe that preventing disease is a very key area. We have then inflammation and immunology. Then we have rare diseases. We have also a big business in anti-infectives, biosimilars, sterile injectables broadly for hospitals. So we have kind of a focused efforts. I'm just thinking how to address your question. Focused on certain countries, we don't look at that, but we certainly look at the global need. Where is the most need and most opportunity for making a difference. And ideally, we want to cure or prevent the disease. And if that's not possible, then at least make it better, right? So I don't know if that addresses your question, but clearly, even us as a very big company, we can't address all research possibilities. We have, therefore, a need to work with a lot of other research organizations that once they have something developed, we then can collaborate to potentially market it. We can't research everything ourselves.
Well,
But I gave you some indication on where we
one last
focus.
question. Go ahead.
Yeah, there are two questions. One to Mr. Rajan. One is that you've been talking about interesting model of making investments, impact investments with lower IRR. Are there examples where you've invested into livelihood generating impact enterprises? And I would like to know about that. The second question is to Amit. Do you see digital platforms growing which will help small investors to make choices on what kind of businesses they invest, which are more triple bottom line?
So, to address your question on, on the livelihood side of impact investing, the entire, we assess, so we've made a few very interesting investments in that space. The entire industry in just capacity building, in human talent is poised to be at something like $1 trillion over the next 10 years, right? I mean, just the number of people who are going to renew their skills, get better and sharper, given the pace at which the world is changing. We used to talk of a career for a lifetime, and now it's a lifetime of careers, right? So that whole change which has happened has given humongous potential to that. So the way we've been able to optimize that is, so the infrastructure, whether it's physical, whether it's in terms of the capabilities of teaching or the digital platforms, et cetera, that guide that, as I said, is the philanthropic piece. And then, executing and operationalizing that is a, profitable model. And we've seen that model work very well, particularly for us.
Amit, you want to comment on the?
Yeah, I think since we're out of time, I'll be brief. Yes, there are multiple digital platforms already in place for philanthropy, as well as social entrepreneurship, as well as generic entrepreneurship. So I think the piece we are finding is that it's not the lack of money, and it's not the lack of platform. It's having the right team around the entrepreneurs that makes a difference, whether the venture is successful or not. So I don't want to sponsor one or the two platforms. I'll let you explore. If need be, I'm happy to help in any way I can. But it's, again, remember, money is just not that's the least important part. I know it's harder to hear when you're listening on the stage. It's the least important part for venture success. It is very important part, but it is the least important part, if that makes any sense.
One last point.
I would agree that, just on this point that there's multiple things. So, if you search, for example, we have a program, this 10,000 entrepreneurs, where we provide credit to emerging women entrepreneur-led companies. So there are many programs that you can tap. So one quick last comment, then I think we're out of time. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to put the comment on, since we are at GS and we're talking of women, I think one of our big initiatives is creating women-centric, content platform for multiple kind of things to help, the entire process of learning, scale pretty rapidly, and that's an exciting project actually we have made up from a company who's leading that project, sitting here in the audience.
Perfect.
So I think that's something.
Well, I want to thank the panelists for a very lively discussion. Hopefully you found it helpful. Thanks again for the participation.